How much time do we have? Camera guys, about 12 and a half minutes. Yeah? Okay. How do we do 12 and a half minutes with you, sir?
We talk really fast.
Yes, I guess we'll talk really fast. Look who is here. Outside of, Andrei Chelichev or somebody like that coming back in, this is Napa Valley royalty in the house. Michael Mondavi, a sincere welcome to Best Wines Online.
It's great to be here, and I compliment you for what you're doing in educating people about the various wines of the world. This is really great.
Thank you. Well, education is key. What I found out is if you educate people, they tend to know what they're getting into, and they tend to buy and drink more.
Well, I always took the attitude of if we can take the mystery out of wine and keep the magic, we'll gain friends forever.
That's very true. I 100% concur. Speaking of magic, you're here today to talk about, we could talk about in 12 and a half minutes. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus. I'm going to, once in my life, focus. And we're going to focus on M.
Okay.
And I want to focus on not just the wine itself, Michael, but what led up to M, starting from 1966.
Okay.
When you were racking barrels with your old man, when you were first making wine in the Napa Valley, getting your hands dirty. Because I looked on the website, I did a little research, and I found out, basically this is kind of like a return for you.
Right. This is really back to my basics.
Yeah.
And I had the luxury of growing up at the Charles Krug Winery. Mm-hmm. And literally 200 yards from the winery was the home I grew up in. From the time I was about 5 years old, my babysitter was the cellar master. My jungle gym were the barrels and the tanks.
Right.
And when there was the change in 1965, and then my father and I started the Robert Mondavi Winery in 1966, I was fresh out of college, but I had never had the responsibility of one of three employees, my father, myself, and only one other, of making the wine. Mm-hmm. And so it was, oh my God. And I did a lot of commuting back to the cellar master at Charles Krug and to their winemaker to pick their brains in the evenings and say, am I doing this right? What shall I do here? So 1966 was really a learning process. Then in 67 through about 72, I thought I knew what I was doing. Mm. And I thought I was, wow, one of these up-and-coming winemakers. Then I realized none of us are winemakers. We're wine growers.
Yeah.
And the focus has to be in the vineyard,
yep,
tasting the grapes. And it was really fun in the 70s then to begin to visit some of the best estates in Burgundy, the first growths, because my brother joined us in 74, and in 75 I was able then to spend 2.5 weeks during the height of their harvest in France. And when you go into a restaurant and it's empty and you see the restaurant equipment, mm-hmm, it's there, but you're not going to learn anything.
Right, right.
With a winery, go into a winery that's not crushing grapes, fermenting the juice, making the wines. It's a beautiful winery, but you're not going to learn anything. And being there, and I think I was one of the first winemakers from California to spend 2.5 weeks during the harvest in Burgundy, Bordeaux, Beaujolais, and I brought with me a mini lab. So if I wanted to run analysis, I could run sugar, acid, pH, mm-hmm, all of it, malolactic, the works. And I realized they didn't care about the analysis.
You were like, show me your numbers.
They cared about what the grape tasted.
Yeah.
They cared about the aromatics and the rate, the constant rate of fermentation. Mm-hmm. And during that 2.5 week period, I probably learned more about the art of winemaking, mm-hmm, than in any other single period of my life. Yeah. It was really stimulating. 2
weeks in Burgundy, 4 years at Davis.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe about even when you...
Well, when I called my father from Burgundy and said, Dad, I think we still have a tank fermenting of the Pinot Noir. Raise the temperature from 75 degrees for the fermentation up to 88 degrees. The phone was dead silence for a minute. And he said, no, because it was a sacrilege to allow red wines, Cabernet or Pinot Noir, to go above 75 degrees Fahrenheit back then in the 60s, early 70s. It was just a common Bible. You knew, never allow it to go higher.
Yeah.
So I tried to tell the cellar master at Domaine de la Romani Conti that he was going to ruin his Echezot.
Damn, I bet that went over.
And he goes, it's the best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
He says, come. And we go into the barrels. And he says, did I ruin this one? Did I ruin this? For the next hour and a half, I'm tasting a plethora of great DRCs.
Let me go back to Latosh again to see if you ruined it.
And so I told my father that, and he said, okay. Flash forward a couple of weeks later, I get home. The wine that we cranked up to 88 degrees was head and shoulders more elegant, more rich layers of flavor than any Pinot Noir we'd ever made before that. And it was just a simple thing we learned from being there with this great winemaker at DRC. And so it's having the luxury of meeting great people in different parts of the world who he learned it from his father, who learned it from his father. You know, this was truly the art and the artisan making beautiful wines.
Yeah, true knowledge.
Yeah.
Gained through generations.
So when the family sold Robert Mondavi in 2004, my wife Isabel and son Rob, daughter Dina, the four of us, needless to say, spent a lot of time talking about that. And we said, you know, we love the wine industry. We're going to stay in the wine business, but we don't ever want to be big again like we were, because it was the financial institutions, it was the legal this, the legal that we were doing, rather than being in the vineyards and making the wine and being in the cellars and blending and meeting people like yourselves and talking about the wine, getting excited about it. And so we said, that's fine, but as the consolidation goes throughout the United States particularly, and really in the world, if we only have a small amount of wine from Napa to sell, we're not going to get the wholesaler or the retailer or restaurateur's attention, because it would be such a small amount of their revenue, they won't pay attention to us. And fine, we can sell it to good restaurants and wine shops in California, but outside of the state of California, it's going to be very, very difficult.
Right.
So I said, what if, like they did in the old guilds, where the craftsmen would bring their wares together at the guild to market and sell them, what if we put together a concept of independent, family-owned, family-run wine companies from the best wine-growing regions of the world, bring our wares together and interdependently then market and sell those wines in the United States. So that was the concept for the marketing side. In the production side, Cabernet has been my baby. I think, that was probably my teething liquid. My mother would dip it in and rub the Cabernet on my gums. And so I wanted to produce a classic Cabernet. And I'd had the opportunity in the 90s to buy a piece of hillside vineyard up on Atlas Peak, 1,400 feet elevation. And the wines that were coming out of there, even with the young vines, was just exquisite. More structure because of the volcanic rock, a little firmer backbone, which was kind of different from the then very voluptuous alcoholic Cabernets that were being produced in Napa in California. And I could never embrace that style because you have less than what's in my glass, and you've had enough of that style of wine. It's so rich and heavy. And my grandmother always taught me, make wine that tastes good. I said, what do you mean? She said, it's simple. If when you serve the wine to family or friends with a meal, if they want a second or third glass, that tastes good. Then she said to me, but if they only drink one, you go back to work. And so that has been a guiding principle also of my wines. I wanted the Cabernet to be big, rich, layers of flavor, nice, long, lingering aftertaste, but it had to have an elegance, kind of like an iron fist, but in a velvet glove.
Yeah. And Atlas Peak does that.
Yes,
yeah.
Atlas Peak does that. But because the vineyard is a rolling hill on volcanic rock, in only a 15-acre parcel, we have, depending on the vintage, this year there will be 9 or 10 separate days of harvest spread over 2.5 weeks. And each day this week, earlier, I was with my son and Tony Coltrane, a winemaker I've had the pleasure of working together with for 41 years. And we're each 2 rows apart in the vineyard. We walk the vineyard, we taste the grapes. We have little plastic ribbon. We go, okay, from this vine, 20 vines forward, and from these vines wide, X number of vines, we mark that off. That's what we picked today. And because of the rolling hills, the southern direction gets ripe first, the northern later. But because it's uneven soil in the hills, they'll have little patches. We'll have an area in a nice square block where we pick just the circle in one portion of it because there's a little knoll there and the soil's slightly lighter and those grapes are beautiful and they get mature about 5 or 6 days sooner. If we waited and let that whole block mature at once, we'd have an average, almost okay wine.
Wow. So
we now end up with 9 or 12 separate components of Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot. That's what this is, a Petit Verdot 4%, 96% Cabernet, and this is the first vintage, the 2009, that is not 100% Cabernet Sauvignon.